I think about, man, I have to perform songs every single night or every other night.
At 39, Bruno Mars finally confirms the rumors. He has sold out stadiums in 18 countries, headlined a Super Bowl halftime show watched by over 100 million people, and stacked up more number one hits than almost anyone else of his generation. But for the last 2 years, the headlines about Bruno Mars haven't been about music at all. They've been about death, about a marriage that never officially existed and a breakup nobody confirmed, about a superstar who, on stage every night in Las Vegas, jokes about being broke while wearing more diamonds than most people will see in a lifetime. So which is it? Is Bruno Mars actually drowning in gambling losses? Or is this the greatest piece of misdirection in modern pop music? Here's what's actually true, what's actually been said, and what Bruno Mars has and hasn't confirmed in his own words. Long before any of this, before the residencies and the rumors, there was a 4-year-old kid in Honolulu wearing a tiny sequin jumpsuit, doing his best Elvis Presley impression for tourists. Bruno Mars, born Peter Gene Hernandez, grew up in a family that performed together a Waikiki lounge act built around his father's love of 50s rock and roll and his mother's hula dancing. By the time he was 5, he was appearing in front of tens of thousands of people at local events, billed as a novelty act, a miniature Elvis with real pipes. He wasn't just a cute kid doing an impression either. People who saw those early shows describe a performer who understood rhythm and stage presence in a way most adults never do. That was the family business for years until it wasn't. When Bruno was a teenager, his parents separated, and the family act that had defined his childhood came apart with it. The financial stability that came from performing together disappeared, and by his own accounts and later interviews, things got hard fast. He's talked publicly about lean years growing up in Hawaii, about hustling for gigs, about knowing early on that music was going to have to be his way out because there wasn't a backup plan. That grit shows up again and again throughout his career, this pattern of getting knocked down and coming back with something bigger. It's part of why, when the rumors started swirling decades later, so many people were quick to believe the worst. They already knew he'd lived through hard times once. Why not again? At 18, Bruno moved to Los Angeles with barely any money and a stack of demo CDs, chasing a record deal. Motown signed him in 2004, and it fell apart within a year without a single official release. For most people, that would have been the end of the dream. For Bruno, it was the beginning of the real work. He linked up with songwriter and producer Philip Lawrence, and later Ari Levine, and the three of them formed a production team that became known as the Smeezingtons. Before Bruno Mars was a household name, this team was writing hits for other artists behind the scenes. They co-wrote Flo Rida's Right Round, a song that shot to number one. They worked on B.O.B.'s Nothing on You, another massive hit. By the time Bruno released his own debut single, the songwriting team he was part of had already helped generate tens of millions of dollars in sales for other people's careers. He wasn't an overnight success. He was a guy who'd already been grinding in the industry for years before most people ever heard his name. His debut single, Just the Way You Are, came out in 2010 and went to number one on the Billboard Hot 100. It made him a star almost instantly, and the album that followed, Doo-Wop's Hooligans, went on to sell millions of copies worldwide and produced hit after hit, including Grenade, a song that became one of the biggest sellers of that entire year. Within a couple of years, Bruno Mars had racked up multiple number one singles, a string of Grammy nominations, and a level of commercial success that put him in rare company. Then came Locked Out of Heaven in 2012, a song that blended funk, reggae, and rock in a way that critics said broke up the monotony of the dance pop era, and it became one of the defining songs of his career. His second album, Unorthodox Jukebox, pushed his sound even further, mixing genres more aggressively than the label wanted, and it paid off, both commercially and critically, winning him his first Grammy for Best Pop Vocal Album. But the song that really cemented Bruno Mars as one of the most important pop artists alive was Uptown Funk, released in 2014 alongside producer Mark Ronson. It spent 14 weeks at number one on the Billboard Hot 100, one of the longest runs in the chart's history at that point, and it turned into a global phenomenon, the kind of song that got played at weddings, sporting events, and parties on every continent. A few years later, his album 24K Magic swept the Grammys, winning Album of the Year, Record of the Year, and Song of the Year in a single night, a nearly unheard-of achievement that put him in the same conversation as the biggest names in music history. Then, in 2021, Bruno Mars did something nobody fully expected. He teamed up with longtime collaborator Anderson .Paak to form a duo called Silk Sonic, a project built entirely around the sound of 70s soul and funk. Their first single, Leave the Door Open, dropped and became an instant hit, eventually winning Record of the Year and Song of the Year at the Grammys. Their full album, An Evening with Silk Sonic, was recorded the old-fashioned way, largely analog, in one room, capturing a warmth that felt like it had been pulled straight out of vinyl collection from decades earlier. It became one of the most acclaimed releases of that year, and it proved Bruno wasn't just chasing pop trends. He was, and is, a genuine student of music history. More recently, he's kept expanding his reach into new corners of the industry. His 2024 collaboration with Lady Gaga, Die With a Smile, became a massive global hit, dominating charts for months and picking up major recognition at award shows. He also linked up with Rose of Blackpink for a song that became one of the biggest K-pop crossover hits of all time, breaking streaming records and drawing headlines around the world for how quickly it caught fire. At 39 years old, Bruno Mars isn't a nostalgia act or a legacy artist coasting on old hits. He's still one of the most commercially dominant performers working today, which is exactly why the financial rumors landed as hard as they did. People don't usually assume a struggling artist is secretly broke. They assume the biggest stars have it all figured out. So when word got out that Bruno Mars might be tens of millions of dollars in debt, it broke the internet specifically because it contradicted everything his career appeared to represent. Here's how the rumor actually started. In March 2024, a segment aired that claimed Bruno Mars owed an enormous sum, reportedly around $50 million, to MGM Resorts, tied to gambling losses, and that he was supposedly working off that debt through his ongoing residency shows in Las Vegas. The report didn't cite verifiable sources, but that didn't slow it down. Within hours, it was everywhere. Entertainment blogs repeated the number without much scrutiny. Social media ran wild with it. Talk show hosts brought it up on air. The story had everything a viral rumor needs: a beloved celebrity, a jaw-dropping dollar figure, and a setting, Las Vegas, that already carries a certain mythology around high-stakes gambling and hidden debt. MGM Resorts responded quickly and directly. In statements to entertainment outlets, the company denied that Bruno Mars owed them any money at all, explicitly stating there was no debt and describing their relationship with him as one of mutual respect built around his standing as one of the top performers in the world. That denial mattered. A company the size of MGM Resorts doesn't casually deny financial claims about a business partner without being fairly confident in that denial, especially when investors and shareholders are paying attention. If there had been real financial exposure or an actual debt arrangement, a flat public denial would have created serious legal and reputational risk for the company. The fact that MGM stood firm and that their stock and public standing were unaffected in the aftermath is a meaningful signal that the core claim, a specific $50 million gambling debt owed directly to the resort, was not accurate as reported. So why did so many people believe it anyway? Partly because Bruno himself has never hidden the fact that he has a history with gambling. In past interviews, long before any of this, he's spoken candidly about gambling when he was younger, including experiences of winning and losing significant money. That honesty, which at the time read as just another colorful detail about a performer who grew up fast in Hawaii, ended up working against him years later. It gave the rumor a foothold. People reasoned that if he'd gambled recklessly before, maybe he still did, and maybe this time the losses were bigger. Combine that with the reality of Las Vegas residency economics, where reports have suggested he earns somewhere in the range of $1.5 million per show, and the math suggested by the rumor didn't feel impossible on its face, even though the specific claim about a debt owed to MGM was never substantiated. What's genuinely interesting and worth paying attention to is how Bruno chose to respond. He never released some carefully worded statement, through a publicist denying everything line by line. Instead, he did what performers who've spent their whole lives on stage tend to do. He worked it into the show. During performances, he's referenced the $50 million figure directly, joking with the crowd about being on the hook for it, joking about friends disappearing when he's winning at the tables, leaning all the way into the story rather than running from it. Clips of those moments spread fast online, racking up millions of views. When Spotify announced he'd crossed 150 million monthly listeners, he responded publicly with a joke about streaming his way out of debt. When he made a surprise appearance alongside Rose at SoFi Stadium, his first words to the crowd referenced the very same rumor. This is the part that gets misread constantly, and it's exactly what a title like Bruno Mars finally confirms the rumors gets wrong if taken literally. Joking about a rumor on stage is not the same as confirming it. If anything, it's closer to the opposite. Performers who are genuinely hiding a real financial crisis don't typically stand in front of thousands of people and turn the exact number being whispered about into a punchline. What Bruno has done is take a story he didn't create, couldn't fully stop, and clearly can't prove a negative about in a satisfying way, and turn it into content that works in his favor. Every time the joke lands, it becomes another clip, another headline, another few million views, and importantly, it never requires him a hand over financial records or confirm a single specific detail. He gets to acknowledge the elephant in the room without validating it. That's not confirmation. That's control. There's also the matter of his personal life, which got tangled up in the same news cycle. Bruno has been in a long-term relationship with Jessica Caban since 2011, and for years she rarely appeared publicly at his events, which is fairly normal for a couple that includes a global superstar who values privacy. Around the same period the financial rumors were peaking, fans noticed some changes in how the two of them interacted online and started speculating about a possible split. It's worth being honest here. Neither Bruno nor Jessica has ever issued a clear public statement confirming a breakup, and speculation built entirely on the absence of anniversary posts or the presence or absence of red carpet appearances isn't confirmation of anything. People are entitled to private lives, even famous people, and jumping from "she didn't post this year" to "they've secretly split" says more about how internet speculation works than it does about the actual state of anyone's relationship. What can be said honestly is that the timing of that speculation overlapped with the gambling debt story, and together they created a narrative arc that felt almost too dramatic to be entirely accurate, which is often a sign that at least some of it has been exaggerated in the retelling. So where does that leave the actual answer to the question in the title? At 39, Bruno Mars hasn't confirmed a $50 million debt to MGM Resorts, because the company that would be owed that money has explicitly said no such debt exists. He hasn't confirmed a breakup either, because no formal statement to that effect has ever been made by either party. What he has confirmed, repeatedly and publicly, is that he's aware of the rumors, that he finds them absurd enough to joke about from a stage in front of thousands of people, and that he'd rather turn the noise and entertainment than spend his energy trying to correct every detail of a story that started with an anonymous, unverified claim. In an industry where public image is currency, that response says a lot about who Bruno Mars actually is. He spent his entire life turning hardship into performance, starting as a kid doing Elvis impressions to help support his family, all the way through a Motown rejection that could have ended his career before it started. Rumors about debt and heartbreak are, in the context of that life story, just another chapter he's decided to write on his own terms, on his own stage, in his own words. What's clear is that the facts people actually can verify tell a much less dramatic story than the headlines suggest. MGM Resorts denied the debt claim on the record. Bruno Mars has never confirmed it as true. His career, by every measurable industry standard, streaming numbers, ticket sales, awards, continues to climb rather than collapse, which would be an unusual trajectory for someone supposedly buried under gambling losses and personal crisis. The gap between the viral version of this story and the documented version of it is enormous. And that gap is exactly why it's worth slowing down and separating what's actually been said from what's simply been assumed. Bruno Mars didn't confirm the rumors. He confirmed that he knows about them, and that, for now, is where the facts actually end and the speculation begins.